Welcome to Tough Talk. I'm your host, Paul Taros, and today my guest is Dr. Jim Hines, who is a Republican candidate for governor. He is not a politician and has never run for office. He has spent his life putting people first, not politics. Jim and his wife Martha have been married for 43 years. They are the proud parents of 7 sons and 14 grandchildren and counting. Jim is an airplane pilot, woodcarver, CPL holder, a lifelong hunter, and a longtime Harley owner and rider. 4th degree black belt in Taekwondo and a distance runner. He has run 5K races in 18 counties in Michigan in the last year. Welcome, Dr. Hines.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Paul.
And let's not get into any fights here.
Okay.
So, you're a physician. You want to tell us a little bit about your practice?
Yes. I've been a medical doctor for 37 years, and I'm an OBGYN and have delivered thousands of babies. I'm what you would call a women's healthcare specialist. And part of that work has not only been in the United States, but my wife and I were medical missionaries in the Central African Republic for 4 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. So why are you running for governor?
Well, because I want to put people first and not politics, but if you dig a little bit deeper, I think it has to do with families being torn apart. We have 7 sons, as you mentioned, and 14 grandchildren. Not a one of our sons who are married, that's 5 of them, and all of our grandchildren, not a one of them live in Michigan. They live in other states. And so what I have seen is I have seen families leave Michigan and families torn apart because they can't get a job or the education is not right, and infrastructure, I think, plays part of that. But jobs and education have torn families apart. And in our family in particular, I think of our one son, our 4th son, who came to me saying, Dad, you know, I really love Michigan, but my savings is going away. I can't find a full-time job. I can't get benefits. And we watched the grandchildren, and he and his wife went off to Florida, and within a week he found a full-time job with benefits, and he was gone. And so I see that happening over and over again. And one of the common factors is a lack of a job that is significant enough to take care of your family. So that is not just a paycheck and living from paycheck to paycheck, but earning enough money that you have money in your pocket that you can save, that you can invest, that you can put towards your kids' education. That is an issue, and I think it's getting better, but we've got to make it a lot better. If we have to grow Michigan. We have to not only attract families to Michigan, but we have to hold on to the families that we have.
Okay. Do you have any specifics on how you would go about doing that?
Well, I would use, if I can use the Jedi agenda, you know, we just watched Star Wars, and I'm a great Star Wars fan, but the Hines Jedi agenda, I think, comes into play here. That's a mnemonic for jobs, education, and infrastructure. And so when we look at jobs, if we want to encourage small business growth and large business growth, we want to keep taxes and regulations under control. And we want to keep our taxes as low as possible, get rid of as many taxes as we can, get rid of regulations. And this causes businesses to thrive. They can hire more employees, they can expand and offer a higher salary to their workers. And so I think that would be critical. The other thing that's critical is, I mean, why would you stay in Michigan, even though it's, I think, the most beautiful state in the union? Why would you stay here if your kids are not getting a good education? And so I think school choice is critically important. I have moms coming into the office all the time, and as I said, I have delivered so many babies, but you know, they bring their little baby in, and these moms and dads, they really believe that the baby they just had is the smartest child in the human race. And they see just so much potential in that child, and they want the best education that they can get. And I think they should have that education. At least they should have the ability to choose what education their child gets. And I have many families where they have 3 children who all could go to the same school. They could, and I ask. But they're in 3 different schools, and I look at the mom who's struggling financially, and I say, well, why 3 schools? And she says, well, because this child has a particular weakness in this area, and I want to see it developed. Or this one is particularly talented, and I want to put that child in this school over here. And so we saw the same thing with our kids. With 7 sons, you would imagine that there wasn't one school that could teach all of our kids. When we were in Africa for 4 years, where I ran a couple hospitals, we homeschooled our kids. We had the opportunity to leave them in America and have them get their education apart from us, but we felt that as parents, they were our responsibility. They were not the government's responsibility, but they were our responsibility. And so we homeschooled our children. And actually, the 2 oldest are medical doctors, and I taught them how to read. Can you imagine the pleasure that gives me to say, hey, you know, I taught you guys how to read. But when we came back from Africa, we wanted to be in a parochial, we wanted our kids to be in a parochial school, which was attached to a church. And as the kids got older, we found out that the science programs of the school were not very strong. And so we had children that would have some classes at the parochial school, and then they would go to the public school for their chemistry and physics and so forth. And to be different, I also had a couple sons who said, you know, we don't want to do that. We want to be dual enrolled. And so sons number 5 and 6 were dual enrolled at our community college. And so when the one graduated from high school, he started as a junior at Michigan. I don't know if you're a Michigan fan or not, but
Michigan grad.
Okay, there you go. Started at Michigan, and the 6th son started as a sophomore at Cedarville in Ohio. And then our last son is a special needs child. He has Down syndrome with autism features to it. And so although he started in a public school, he's in a special needs school. And so parents want that ability to choose. They know their kids better than anybody else. The education for their kids. And so to keep families together, education and jobs are just so critically important, and this is what families are looking for. And so if we want to grow Michigan, and I absolutely want to grow Michigan, then we have to meet the needs of our citizens.
You mentioned education. What's your feeling on Common Core?
I would get rid of Common Core. I have at least a dozen teachers that I've spoken to that are my patients, and their concern is that they're being forced to teach certain things that they would just as soon not teach, and not having enough time to teach the things that they would like to teach. And education-wise, I really think we need to go back to the basics of reading, writing, arithmetic, with parents involved in the education of the kids, so that parents know what's being taught in the classroom, and teachers having the freedom to teach what they believe the students need. And it's not like every student has the same background, family background, or learning abilities. And so this gives teachers much more freedom to teach what needs to be taught. In particular, I think history is being neglected in our school system. And so I would just add that history for me is very important. So it's not just, you know, the STEM program with, you know, math and science and so forth, but history is being neglected, as well as I think reading is a pretty difficult issue right now.
Okay. Under Governor Snyder, Medicaid was expanded, you know, under the Healthy Michigan program. Currently, that expansion is costing additional $4 billion a year. Most of that is being picked up by the federal government at this time, but there's eventually the state's going to have to pick up 5% and then 10% of the cost, and 10% of $4 billion is $400 million, so it's a significant amount. What's your feeling about the Medicaid expansion and Healthy Michigan program?
Well, first of all, I'm a medical doctor, so I like the idea that everybody has medical care. I think the expansion of Healthy Michigan has been a disaster. What I see in the office is I see patients that are still not coming into the office when they have medical problems. They're headed off to the emergency room, so it hasn't really caused my patients to come into the office. The deductibles are high, the copays are high. Hospitals really like Healthy Michigan, and you have to understand the reason is because these patients would come to the hospital without any insurance, and the hospitals would write it off. And so now, when patients with Healthy Michigan come to the hospital, they are getting some reimbursement, which is good for the hospitals. So yeah, it's a huge issue, and the state doesn't have, billions of dollars just to give away. And so it's an issue that has to be dealt with. Healthcare is important. Our health insurance is way too high. People are paying way too much for their health care. You're paying $1,000 or more a month, and your deductible is still $8,000 to $12,000, and so it's not a viable option. So I'm for health care, and there are a number of options, but I think that as we look at this issue, as we grow the economy, as we encourage small businesses to provide health care, because it's cheaper. So we need to, so businesses that would like to, that can't afford to, our office spends over $250,000 for our 45 employees. And it's a fringe benefit, but many small businesses are not able to afford that, so they don't do it. So if we can get the cost of healthcare down, maintain the quality, tort reform, being able to barter across state borders, there are a lot of things that play into part to making something that will function for our society.
Okay. Infrastructure is a big issue. The roads and the water and sewer lines. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that? Well,
that's again part of the JEDI agenda. That's the I, and I got 4 flat tires in 1 year from hitting potholes. And even coming down to the studio, I'm concerned, because the roads are so bad. We don't have enough money to fix all the roads and all the bridges. We don't. We have to prioritize. We have to fix. We have to maintain. So when you look at fixing roads, you have to calculate what it's going to cost to maintain the roads. There's technology to make better roads. So I lived in France for a year, and I'm familiar with the road system there and the quality of material that they use. And we're tending not to use that material, but we need to use the best quality material that will last the longest. And especially in Michigan, because of the salt and the freeze-thaw, we can't put in cheap roads. So we need to fix the roads, we need to prioritize it, and we need to put roads in that will last, depending on what part of the state we're talking about. And of course, bridges need to be fixed, and we have sewer systems that need to be replaced. A lot of it's from neglect, but again, over time, things do fall apart. But we have to have a governor that sees that we can't wait until things have fallen apart to fix them. We have to maintain them on a schedule.
Okay. What about smart meters?
Well, I support choice of our citizens. Okay. And I'm pro-life. I'll just say I'm pro-life when it comes to the life of people. But when it comes to the smart meter, I would support choice. And by that I mean that if you want a smart meter, you can have a smart meter. If you like the technology, you like the things that they're gathering information from, that's great. If you want an analog meter, then you should have that option too. It may cost a little bit per month because you're going to have someone coming out to check the meter, or perhaps we could be a little more sophisticated and we could have homeowners report the usage, and then maybe someone comes out once a year or once every 6 months and double checks it, and that would get the cost down. So The analog system, I think, is a great system. Many people are familiar with it. They're very comfortable with it, and they don't like the smart meters intruding potentially into their family. And so they should have the option of having an analog meter that doesn't cost an arm and a leg, almost like punitive. You know, you're going to have an analog meter, we're going to make you pay. I'm not really for that.
Okay. Energy choice in 2008 was capped at 10%. So, you know, 90% is pretty much, at least down here, going to DT and Consumers Energy. That's a guaranteed market for them. You know, what's your feelings on energy choice?
Well, I do have a lot of experience with energy, and I like a wide variety of energy. When we were in Africa, when I arrived, I was delivering babies with a flashlight. I was doing surgery with a flashlight, and I said, nonsense to this. And so we solarized one department after another. So OB, because I'm an OBGYN, that was the first department we solarized, and then surgery, and then pharmacy and lab and so forth. So I have experience solarizing hospitals, and we did both hospitals, and we did a number of our dispensaries. In fact, our house was a solarized house. We had solar panels on the roof. We had a wood-burning stove that heated up the water so that we could have hot water for showers. We had a kerosene refrigerator, and we had diesel backup. So wide variety of energy. And I think that if green energy, so solar, and in particular, and wind, were so cost effective, then I think the market should regulate that. But it's the subsidies that are making these viable options currently. And so I think we should look at it. But if the proponents are so positive about wind and solar, then again, the market should push people that way. And I don't believe that it is. I think that it's the subsidies that we're getting from the federal government that is making it attractive. You take those subsidies away, and the green energy is going to shrink. I like green energy, and so perhaps we do need to subsidize it. I'm not saying necessarily don't do that. I'm just saying we need to realize that it's probably not as viable long term as we might think if we have to subsidize it. Are there ways to get the prices down? That's what I would explore.
Okay. Well, I was really concerned about, you know, these two companies, DT and Consumers. By statute, they get to supply 90% of the energy in this market. And they use a combination of, you know, fossil fuels, wind, solar. But other competitors are relegated to only having 10% of the market. Would you be in favor of expanding, you know, more competition so other people, other utility companies could supply more than 10% in this market?
So our two energy companies kind of have a monopoly,
Right.
an oligopoly.
Right.
And I'm a firm believer in competition. I believe competition pushes people to do better, to dream, to expand the horizon, to come up with options that you don't think of when you have the corner on the market. And so absolutely I would push for competition. And I think that the taxpayers will see decreased energy cost because of the competition.
And decreased energy costs is good for business, too.
It's good for business because we're talking about, you know, 55,000 farms and small businesses, large businesses, restaurants, and, you know, everybody will benefit from that. And then they can expand, hire an extra employee. Energy costs are tremendous.
Okay. What's your view of free speech on college campuses, or maybe I should say the lack of free speech?
Well, I mean, we're talking about the Bill of Rights, and we have the freedom of speech, whether you like it or not. You know, if it's my opinion, I have the freedom to express that, and we're guaranteed that in the Constitution, and that should be the case on campuses. That should be the case everywhere. Unfortunately, there are individuals who feel that free speech only applies to their speech and not to someone who opposes them. And I guess even deeper is the question. The question would be, well, why do they think that? Is it because this is what they're taught in school? And I think part of it may be ignorance of history, because history is just not being taught. Our Constitution is not being taught like it used to be taught. And so it's important that everybody, all Michiganders, understand that we do have that freedom of speech and press and so forth. Now, not to use vulgar language and not to cut down other people, but to actually have a discussion. This is what I believe, and this is why. What do you believe? Why do you believe that? Is there common ground? How can we resolve any differences that we might have? And on the other hand, realize that the differences may not be resolvable, but we can still be friends. And so that concept has to be on our campuses, every single one, including our high schools and middle schools and our teachers as they teach.
State Representative Martin Howrlack introduced House Bill 4430, which would ban material support or resources for warrantless federal surveillance. Do you support that bill? Do you oppose it?
Well, I'm not familiar with the bill.
Okay.
But, it used to be that you would get a search warrant, so that if there was probable cause or some indication, you would go to the judiciary system and you would get a search warrant and you would search. But it would be legal. And so we've moved from that to surveillance of your phone, your computer, and lots of other things without a warrant. And I think that's an invasion of privacy. It really is an invasion of privacy. And I understand the thoughts that, well, this individual may be doing things that is going to harm the community or harm the state. But we have to work through that. But that doesn't mean that we start surveilling people just because, their first name is Paul, for example. There has to be a good reason for it.
Okay. House Bill 4158, which deals with civil asset forfeiture, which was introduced by State Representative Peter Lucido, would prohibit forfeiture unless an individual is actually convicted. Mm-hmm. Would you be supportive of that bill?
I would support it. Again, I haven't read the whole bill, but I think the thoughts are that the police or law enforcement come to your home because maybe a neighbor is called, and they search your house and they take your cash, they maybe take your car, they take your television, and you don't get them back. And not only do you not get them back, perhaps there was no cause for the visit in the first place. So I think we have to be careful that when we take property of somebody else, that there really is a probable cause for it. And if they're not found guilty, then that property needs to be returned.
Okay. State Representative Jim Runstead introduced House Bill 5060, which would disclose the names of companies getting multi-million-dollar mega payments, which are the Michigan Economic Growth Authority. These payments were established, I believe, under the Granholm administration. Mm-hmm. And at this time, no one knows what companies are receiving these payments. Mm-hmm. So what Representative Runstead wants to do is, create transparency, let the public know which companies are getting how much. Mm-hmm. Would you be supportive of that bill?
I support transparency completely. So not only in individuals running for office, but in our government. So in all three branches of our government, there needs to be transparency. I believe transparency is a form of accountability. So when you're transparent with your finances, when you're transparent with who got what bid, I think that decreases crony capitalism. So we're all for capitalism, but not the wrong way. And so crony capitalism, I think, plays part of this. And how can we decrease that? Either we put out bids or we don't put out bids. If we put out bids, why did you choose the one to go with that you did? That has to be transparent. And if there's nothing to hide, then why not be transparent and open to the general public?
Okay. Now, you're running as a Republican candidate.
Yes.
Not having run for any office before, why did you decide to run as a Republican versus Democrat or Libertarian?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good question, Paul. There are a lot of my just core beliefs that are seated in the Republican platform. My love for the Constitution, my love for the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, sovereignty of a country with borders, freedom of education. These are all things that I strongly believe in, and the Republican Party does. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't be a Democrat and support those, but they, as a whole, fit more my philosophy of politics, my philosophy of government, running of a state or the country.
Okay. Well, that's about all the time we have, so I want to thank you so much for taking time out to appear on my show, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thanks, Paul. It's been great. Appreciate it.
Thank you.